Alright guys, welcome back to our lectures on this issue of sectionalism. Now, at the same time that the Kansas-Nebraska Act is being passed, a new political party is emerging in this country, and that's the Republican Party. It's a group of anti-slavery politicians from all parties join together and form this party. And in 1856, they nominate John C. Fremont for president, but he ends up losing the election to Democrat James Buchanan.
1856. As Franklin Pierce's presidency was fading, political parties were disintegrating, just like the nation. The Whigs were in disarray, with the Northern anti-slavery faction deserting to form a new party, the Republicans. Slavery once again dominated the election, with Republicans rallying against any slavery expansion, while Democrats, whose motto was anybody but Pierce, refused to nominate their own president. The anybody they chose was James Buchanan, a dull politician who seemed likely to offend the fewest voters.
James Buchanan was a Democrat from Pennsylvania, but he sympathized with the Southerners in slavery. He thought that the slaveholding Southerners who wanted to secede had no right to secede, but they were more sinned against than sinning. He thought that Northerners ought to compromise with them.
The Democratic strategy worked. Buchanan walked away with all the Southern states and 4 Northern, just enough to win. He didn't have an overwhelming mandate, but the 65-year-old Buchanan did have the qualifications to become the 15th president.
He'd been Secretary of State, he'd been in Congress. In fact, he'd spent the previous 4 years before his election in 1856 as American minister to Great Britain.
Buchanan was apparently insufferable. Andrew Jackson hated him so much that he sent him as far away from Washington as he could.
Now the fussy, unimaginative man was at the center of a political maelstrom. The former lawyer believed the president and all government should be focused on restraint, an approach that bled into his inaugural address.
Buchanan gets up at his inaugural and says that the problem of slavery in the territories is a judicial question, which he says the court will decide it, and we will happily obey whatever the court decides.
The Supreme Court had been deliberating over a case that was as controversial as Roe versus Wade or the 2000 Bush-Gore election decision, a lawsuit from slave Dred Scott.
Now, Dred Scott was a slave who had been transported from slave states into free states and territories by his master. And in 1857, his lawyers were arguing that he was no longer a slave but now a free man because he was living in a free state. And Chief Justice Roger B. Taney said that no, you're not. And he argues this for 2 big reasons, is that African Americans were not citizens, so Scott had no basis to sue for his freedom, and that slaves were property, and states could not take away property without due process of law. The reaction to this was just unbelievable, because the Southerners loved it, the Northerners were absolutely outraged that slavery could be carried into any state at this point. Even Abraham Lincoln was somebody who would fight against it.
The Dred Scott case represented an attempt by the judicial branch to resolve a conflict that clearly the first 2 branches of government had not been able to resolve. The presidency, the legislature, had not been able to figure out what to do about slavery. And so the judiciary, the Supreme Court, stepped in.
Dred Scott sued for his freedom because he had been living with his master in free territories in the North. The Supreme Court ruled against him, deciding he was a possession with no legal standing.
They ruled that, in fact, he was not a citizen of the United States, meaning no black person could be a citizen of the United States. Therefore, blacks were property. They were no different from a piece of land, a piece of furniture, and Buchanan took the only position a fussy Pennsylvania lawyer could possibly take, which is, that's the law, that settles it. It's over.
Buchanan thought that the debate over slavery had been settled. There was no legal precedent for counteracting a Supreme Court ruling, even if Buchanan had wanted to, and he didn't.
He's another case of someone who stood by while the car was going toward the cliff and over the cliff.
The 1850s would have been different if you had had presidents who were leaders, who were not willing to give everything to slavery and nothing to freedom. What if Buchanan had had a backbone? but he didn't. And that's the problem.
So Lincoln sort of steps out of his role as a country lawyer in Springfield, Illinois, and decides that he is going to run for office. And in 1858, he steps forward to accept the Republican nomination for Senate and gives one of his most famous speeches of all time.
A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure, permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall. But I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing, or all the other.
Now, Lincoln was up against a pretty tough challenge here because Stephen Douglas was a senator from Illinois, and he was very, very popular in this state. But he challenges Douglas to a series of debates across there, and Douglas argued in favor of the Kansas-Nebraska Act and that Lincoln was a dangerous abolitionist. Lincoln just simply wanted to contain slavery to where it currently was and not extend it to the new territories in there. But he did say that African Americans were entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, even though they weren't entitled to necessarily equality. In the end, it's Douglas that wins, but Lincoln has emerged as a strong candidate for the Republican nomination in 1860. Now, about a year after those debates, our old friend John Brown, everybody's favorite lunatic, comes back, and now he still believes he is on this mission from God.
They're not going to catch us. We're on a mission from God
To end slavery, and he has this plan where he's going to raid the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, steal the weapons, hand them to slaves there, and hope that they will kill their masters. His plan quickly goes awry. They're captured there. Several people are killed. Brown is arrested, tried and convicted of treason, and hung. And to Southerners, it's a joyous day. To Northerners, he's seen as this martyr for the cause of abolition. And it's just a further evidence of the divide that this nation is facing as we head into the 1860s. Thanks, guys, for paying attention. Hopefully we took good notes, and we'll see you tomorrow.